Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Malmaser. I'm one of the naturalists for Summit Metro Parks, and we're here at Silver Creek Metro Park. And today we're going to be walking on the Chippewa Trail and learning about reading the landscape. One of the things that you want to look for when you're reading the landscape are patterns or trees that aren't really growing how they normally would grow in the woods. If you look out across the wood lot, you see things scattered and there's no pattern or rhyme or reason for where they're growing. When you come across something like this, when everything's in a straight row, right down the area, you can kind of get an idea that something's going on there. And that something is called a fence row. And if you look down straight, you can see that on this side, or the south side of the fence row, all the trees are smaller and it just looks like a much more open area as opposed to the north side, which is your woodlot. This would indicate to me that this area here to the south was old pasture or old agricultural land. Normally you would find fence in some of these trees, and the fence would be on the south side or this side of the tree. So when the animals pushed up against it, it wouldn't push the staples out of the fence and the fence would fall down. The other thing that you can get a good indication of is if the branches on some of the trees are on the south side and there's very little branching on the north side. This would indicate that there was more sunlight on this side, so the branches on the trees would then grow towards the sun, and you would have branching on one side as opposed to the other. Occasionally you'll come across old fence posts in the woods and you'll say, what is going on here? Well, if you look closely to the north and to the south here, you'll see that this fence post is in line with a line of trees, and at the time when the pasture to the east of us was in use, this tree and this tree wasn't here, and they had to put something up to hold the wire. Now, what's really fun to do with fence posts is to try to figure out what they're made out of. Most fence posts back in the day were made out of locust and or chestnut. There were a lot of chestnuts in this area. We are within the range of the chestnut. And my guess is, looking at the wood color here on this post, that this could be an old piece of chestnut. And the other reason that I say that is chestnut will last pretty much forever. This post has probably been here for over 100 years. One of the other things that you want to look at when you're reading the landscape is when you walk in off a trail and you see this large forested area, you want to try to get an idea of the different types of trees that are there, because depending on the species that are there, it could be an indication of logging that took place 50 to 60 to 100 years ago, depending on the tree species. For example, here we have red maple, we have elm, we have a cherry over there, and we have this big poplar. All right? And as you look across the landscape, you predominantly see these 4 species of trees. What you don't see, however, are the oaks. If you look across here, there are no oak trees in this forest, or if they are, they're very small. This would indicate to me that this forest was high graded, or the logger came in and took only the species of trees that were of high value, i.e. the oaks. To do that, they leave all the rest of the stuff to grow and fill in as needed. The other thing you can look at is the fact that all these trees are pretty much the same size or age. Even though this tree is big, it's probably the same age as that cherry there, because poplars, as we all know, grow faster than the other trees. So if you look at this, I would say that this area, the oak trees were cut out, the small saplings, what were left to grow and fill in the rest of this forest. When you come upon a tree of this magnitude in an open area like this is commonly called a wolf tree or a sentinel tree. This tree was probably in the middle of the pasture, and you can imagine the cows or the horses laying underneath in the shade on a sunny day. This tree grew this large because there were no other trees in the area to compete with it. That's why you see branches going all different directions, because it had no competition from other trees in the forest. It also got to this size because, again, being the only tree, it had all the nutrients, all the water, and all the things it needed to grow to this immense size. So when you see a tree like this, you know that there was a pasture in this area, and this was the tree that the animals took refuge. As you're walking along the trail, occasionally you'll come across trees like this. These are aspen trees. Aspen trees indicate that at one point in time, this was either a pasture or it was a clear cut and everything was cut down. The reason being, aspen trees need light in order to grow. So they are what is called a pioneer species, or one of the first trees to grow either in a pasture or a clear-cut area. Another pioneer species would be locust trees. After the trees, the other trees fill in, either the aspen or the locust will eventually die because the other tree's canopy will shade them out and they'll die out. This is how you can tell the age of a forest. If you see a lot of dead aspen trees that haven't rotted but they're dead, or a lot of dead locust trees, you'll note that that forest is probably about 100 years old, because it took that long for the trees to grow, shade them out, and die. And that's called forest succession. One of the things that you come across periodically when you're reading the landscape are unusual looking trees. This particular tree is an apple tree, and this particular tree is very old. The reason that I can say it's very old is the way its growth pattern. If you look, the first 6 feet of the tree, there are no branches. This is because the animals have nibbled off the tree, the limbs, until they can't reach anymore, and then it spreads out into this umbrella fashion. Then the animals use it for cover, but this is a clear indication that this particular tree was in the pasture, and the animals, that's called browse, when they nibble off the branches. Deer do that considerably in the woods all the time in forests today. But this is a perfect example of a tree that was nibbled on over time, and then got to the point where the animals couldn't reach the branches, and then they grew in this umbrella type approach. The other thing that you'll notice throughout the woods, if you see these types of trees, this was an old apple orchard. Apples were very, very important back in the 18 and early 1900s. Apple cider was the drink of choice, along with brandy, and that was because of the sanitary conditions of our water sources. Occasionally you'll come across an area where there's a large concentration of pine trees. In this part of the state, pine trees are not normally grown in such large concentrations unless they were planted. The reason that they were planted could have been a variety of reasons. Could have been a reforestation project that a farmer wanted to do. And in this particular case, this was done by the Girl Scouts. Throughout our park district, we have several areas where the Girl Scouts have planted pines, such as Piney Woods at Goodyear, up at Hampton Hills, and here in this area, and there's a few others across the park district. You can age a pine tree by counting the spokes, so to speak, on the tree. Between each spoke is basically a year's worth of growth. So if you count the spokes, you can see how old the pine tree really is. Occasionally you'll come across tree species that indicate something's going on. This particular tree is a sycamore tree. Sycamore trees like wet feet. So if you look around the landscape and you see a lot of sycamore trees, chances are you're going to see a swamp or a wetland of some type. Pioneers, as they were crossing the plains, would see either sycamore or cottonwood trees, and they would make a beeline for those areas because they knew there was water there. So when you're walking through the forest, trees can tell you what's going on the ground, as well as some of the other features in the forest. What you have in front of you here is evidence of a significant wind event. You'll see that all these trees have been broken off in some fashion. Some of the trees back in the landscape have totally been pushed over and knocked down. If they're all going in the same direction, you can deduce that it was probably something that's called wind shear, or straight line winds that came through in a thunderstorm or something of that fashion. If you see trees down in all different directions, you know that that could have been a tornado or some type of swirling wind that touched. They flew in different directions. Another evidence of tornado would be twisting trees that are just literally twisted right in, and it looks like somebody just took and twisted them with your hands. Occasionally you'll see trees that have streaks down the side. They could be black, or they could go around it like a barber pole, and that's evidence of lightning. So all these little clues that you see throughout the woods are indication of some natural event. As we come to the end of the trail, I want to thank you for joining me today, and hopefully you've learned something about reading the landscape. Please come back and visit Silver Creek and Chippewa Trail and try to find these things that we've talked about today on your own. Thanks again, and happy trails.